Karen slapped girl with leg braces for cutting the slide line. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind that coaxed families out of their homes and into the embrace of the neighborhood park. Children's laughter rang out like wind chimes on a breeze, tangled with the rhythmic squeaks of swings, the hollow clatter of sneakers on climbing frames, and the hum of idle conversation among the adults dotting the benches and picnic tables. Trees cast long, dappled shadows across the grass, and the sun beamed down in golden stripes through their leaves, making everything feel a little softer, a little slower, as if the world had temporarily forgotten to be cruel. Near the middle of this idyllic chaos, a young girl named Lily moved steadily along the rubbery path of the playground, her small figure slightly hunched with effort, her arms held out for balance as her legs, locked into sleek plastic braces, propelled her forward with quiet, practiced resolve. Lily, 8 years old and brimming with determination, was used to standing out, though she never liked it much. The leg braces, worn from regular use and patterned with faded stars and swirls, supported her with every step, compensating for muscles that didn't quite listen to her brain the way they should. She had learned not to be embarrassed by the stairs. Instead, she focused on the things she loved, like the slide, her favorite part of the playground, which she insisted felt like flying even if it wasn't very high or very fast. The path to it was longer for her than it was for other kids, but that never deterred her. She simply waited, watched, and moved at her own pace, always careful not to cut in front or cause trouble. She had learned the rhythm of the playground just like she had learned how to walk with braces, slowly, but with purpose. As Lily neared the base of the slide structure, she paused to let 2 kids dash past her, giving them a small smile as they bounded up the stairs with the reckless grace of youth. Then she resumed, one foot in front of the other, until she reached the bottom step. Her hands reached out and gripped the railing tightly, both for stability and reassurance, and she began her slow ascent. No one in the cluster of children nearby seemed to mind. In fact, a few stepped aside instinctively, used to seeing her around the park, understanding in the unspoken way that kids sometimes do that Lily just needed a little more time. A few of the younger ones even waited quietly, absorbed in their own games or small conversations. It should have been a non-event. It should have just been a little girl climbing the stairs for her turn on the slide. But then came the sharp voice that pierced through the ambient calm like a needle through fabric. A woman, tall and thin with heavily highlighted hair pulled into a tight bun and large sunglasses covering most of her face, stood near the jungle gym with a large iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She was watching the slide with a growing look of impatience, her son, a boy maybe 6 or 7 years old, clutching her leg and whining about how long the line was. Her body language crackled with irritation as she tapped her foot and stared at Lily like the girl was some sort of obstruction rather than a person. She muttered something under her breath, inaudible to most but acidic enough that her expression spoke volumes. Her son, emboldened by his mother's energy, pointed toward Lily and loudly complained, "She's cutting. That girl's cutting in front." The woman, the kind who might be generously described as entitled and less generously as something far worse, began walking toward the slide structure with an air of authority entirely unjustified by her behavior. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't look around to check if Lily had been waiting. Her eyes, hidden behind tinted lenses, were narrowed in disdain as she crossed the playground and came to a halt at the bottom of the slide stairway just a few steps below Lily. Her voice, this time louder, cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Excuse me. You can't just sneak into line like that. Other kids have been waiting, and it's not fair for you to just take a shortcut." Lily turned around, confused, one hand gripping the rail and the other raised slightly, perhaps in defense or just to gesture her innocence. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain that she had been waiting, that she was just slower, but before she could get the words out, the woman stepped forward abruptly and slapped Lily's hand, not with full force, but with enough impact to jar the girl's balance and make her sit down hard on the step. Gasps echoed around the playground. A parent nearby dropped their water bottle. One child burst into tears, startled by the suddenness of the act. Karen, that was how she would be remembered, even if no one yet knew her name, stood over the girl, her expression hard and unyielding. You think those braces mean you don't have to follow the rules like everyone else, she said with a sneer. You're not special. You're just slow. The words were a slap on their own, more cutting than the physical one. Lily's lower lip trembled. Her eyes, wide with both confusion and humiliation, filled with tears. She tried to scramble back up, her movements now more frantic than careful, but her coordination was off, and she couldn't find her footing. The other children stared, frozen. The adults nearby were rising now, a few already making their way toward the scene. A man pulled out his phone, recording. A woman was speaking into hers, her tone urgent, asking for help, maybe park security, maybe even the police. Somewhere behind the crowd, a teenage girl who had been sitting quietly on a bench watching this unfold was now moving at a full sprint toward the slide. Her face was a storm of disbelief and fury, her hands clenched, heart racing. But it wouldn't just be her. The air had changed, thickened with shock and outrage, and what had started as an ordinary, sunny afternoon had twisted into something surreal. The children's park, once filled with warmth and joy, had become the stage for something darker, a cruel misunderstanding, a flash of ableist aggression, and a little girl caught in the center of it all, still trying to climb the stairs. The moment following the slap hung in the air with unbearable heaviness, like the thick pause between a lightning flash and the boom of thunder that follows. A cluster of parents had stopped what they were doing, their eyes trained on the woman who still stood at the base of the slide, her hand now on her hip, her sunglasses catching the sunlight like mirrors reflecting nothing but contempt. Children stood frozen, unsure whether to cry or simply watch, and Lily remained on the stair, shaken, stunned, and holding her arm where the slap had landed, as if trying to make sense of the sting still blooming across her skin. The innocence of the park had evaporated in an instant, replaced with an uncomfortable tension that turned every pair of eyes toward the scene now unraveling in real time. From the far end of the playground, the girl's older sister, a teenager named Mia, had seen everything and was now shoving past a row of strollers and picnic blankets, her voice rising above the murmurs around her. Hey! Hey, what the hell are you doing? She shouted, her words more desperate than angry at first, but growing fiercer with every step. By the time she reached the bottom of the slide, her face was flushed with disbelief and fury, the kind of primal protectiveness that surged in all at once when someone sees their loved one hurt. She dropped to her knees beside Lily without even looking at the woman, cupping her sister's face and examining her hand for marks, asking in a low, trembling voice if she was okay, if she could still move her arm, if she was hurt anywhere else. Lily's voice was barely a whisper, but she nodded, her cheeks now streaked with tears. Karen, still refusing to back away, took a step forward and crossed her arms, clearly unwilling to show even a sliver of remorse. Your sister was cutting the line, she said, her tone more irritated than apologetic, as if she were talking about a parking violation and not a slap delivered to a disabled child. She came out of nowhere and just walked up the slide. My son has been waiting, and I'm not going to let some kid pretend she gets a free pass just because she's wearing braces. That's not how the world works. Her son, standing awkwardly behind her, now seemed less emboldened, shrinking back under the weight of the gathering crowd and the reality that his mother's fury wasn't being mirrored by anyone else. A few feet away, a man in his 40s stepped forward, his phone still recording. I've got everything on video, he said firmly, making sure his voice carried. The girl was here before your kid. She waited. You slapped a child, everyone saw it. That small declaration seemed to unlock the floodgates. Other parents began chiming in, some audibly disgusted, others stepping closer to surround the area as if collectively deciding to bear witness. One woman, tall, dressed in jogging clothes, holding a toddler, spoke up next. That little girl has been coming here for years. Everyone knows her. She's always polite, always careful. You've got some nerve. Still, Karen stood her ground, puffing up in defiance, as though doubling down on her false narrative could somehow overpower the truth that had already spread through the park like wildfire. Mia stood now, positioning herself between her sister and the woman. Her voice shook, not out of fear but the kind of outrage that comes when someone knows there is no justification for what has just occurred. You laid your hands on my sister, she said, her voice low and dangerous. She has cerebral palsy. She walks slower than most kids. That doesn't mean she's cutting in line. That doesn't mean you get to touch her. Who do you think you are? Karen scoffed in response, rolling her eyes behind the sunglasses, but she said nothing. Her silence now was more damning than any excuse could have been. A moment later, a uniformed park ranger arrived, alerted by a parent who had called the emergency number posted near the restrooms. He was young, maybe mid-20s, but the seriousness in his face made it clear he understood the gravity of the situation immediately. He quickly moved through the crowd, asked everyone to step back, and approached Karen with a firm yet measured tone. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the slide and speak with me over here." Karen bristled but complied, perhaps realizing for the first time that this wasn't just a parenting squabble or a misunderstood playground tiff. As she walked with the ranger to the edge of the play area, she began speaking rapidly, waving her arms in exaggerated gestures, already trying to spin her version of events. The ranger listened quietly, occasionally glancing over at the crowd and then toward Lily, who was now sitting on the bench beside Mia, still visibly shaken but beginning to calm. Another ranger arrived and began taking statements from witnesses, speaking with the man who had recorded the incident and the woman with the toddler who had seen Lily waiting her turn. Every account aligned. Lily had not cut the line. She had waited. She had walked slowly, yes, but she had done nothing wrong. The woman had overreacted, aggressively, and had escalated a non-issue into an act of physical aggression. As statements were gathered and the story took shape with consistency and clarity, Karen's defensiveness turned to something else. Her face, visible now that she had removed her sunglasses, was tight with discomfort. Whether it was embarrassment, fear of consequences, or simply the bitter taste of being publicly contradicted, something had shifted. But still, no apology came. She didn't look toward Lily or her sister. She simply crossed her arms and stared off toward the parking lot, lips pursed, jaw set. By the time the situation had settled, the rangers informed Mia and the others that they would be filing an official incident report. If they wished to press charges, they could do so. The man with the video promised to share his footage with Mia, offering his contact information and a few words of support. Other parents came forward, some offering their own videos, others simply placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder and telling her she was brave, that she had done nothing wrong. The crowd, once a gathering of scattered families enjoying a spring day, had become a quiet circle of solidarity, their voices carrying not just outrage but a shared sense of justice. As Karen was escorted off the premises by one of the rangers, her son following behind silently, a strange silence fell over the park for a few seconds. Then, slowly, the usual noises returned, the laughter, the calls for one more push, the clatter of sneakers on playground steps. But something had changed. Lily, now sipping water beside her sister, wasn't smiling just yet. But her hand no longer trembled. And when she looked toward the slide, she didn't look afraid. The aftermath of the incident lingered in the park air like a bitter taste that refused to dissipate, even as the ordinary rhythm of the playground slowly returned. Children hesitantly climbed the monkey bars again, parents resumed their scattered conversations with a tentative kind of ease, and the creak of swings and the buzz of laughter began to fill in the hollow left by the confrontation. But for Lily and Mia, the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly, the memory of the slap and the woman's contempt burning behind their eyes like the sun hanging too low in the sky. They remained on the bench, shaded beneath the swaying limbs of a wide sycamore, a disposable water bottle resting between them, condensation glistening against the plastic like sweat on the backs of their necks. Lily held it with both hands, not sipping, just turning it absently while her sister sat close, watching her with the intense focus of someone trying to will stability back into a moment that had fractured in a very real, very public way. Mia hadn't spoken much after the ranger left, other than to thank the man who had recorded the incident and to confirm that she had indeed received the video file via text. She had watched it twice, grimly, the camera work shaky but clear enough to capture Karen's voice, the impact of her hand against Lily's, and the stunned reactions of nearby children and adults alike. It had been difficult to watch, but not because it revealed anything she hadn't seen with her own eyes. It was difficult because it made everything feel cemented, permanent, Something undeniable and horrifying that now lived in pixelated truth on her phone screen. She'd known, instinctively, that Karen was the kind of person who would deny everything if given the chance. But now there was proof, and something about having that evidence made the entire experience heavier, more real. After some time, Lily finally broke the silence between them, her voice so soft Mia had to lean closer to hear her. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, not as a question but as a fragile declaration, like she was still trying to convince herself that what had happened wasn't her fault. Mia immediately reached out, taking one of her sister's hands in hers and squeezing it gently. "You didn't," she said. "Not even a little. You were just walking. You were waiting like everyone else. That woman, she was just cruel. That's on her, not you." Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on the ground, and the way her shoulders hunched inward made Mia's stomach twist. This wasn't just about a slap or a single confrontation. This was about how someone had looked at Lily, had looked at her braces, her slower steps, her small frame, and seen inconvenience instead of innocence. It was the kind of wound that didn't bleed but still cut deeply. Around them, a few familiar faces passed by. Parents who had seen what happened offered brief words of support, some kneeling to speak to Lily directly with warm, reassuring smiles. One older woman, her gray hair pulled back in a bun and her voice as calm as a lullaby, handed Lily a small bag of fruit snacks from her purse and whispered that brave girls deserved sweet things. Lily smiled at that, a ghost of her usual grin, and Mia mouthed a silent thank you as the woman patted her on the arm and continued on her way. It was a small act of kindness, but in the wake of cruelty, it bloomed in both girls' hearts like a candle against the dark. Eventually, one of the rangers returned, Officer Rayburn, who introduced himself more formally now that the chaos had settled. He approached with a clipboard, sunglasses perched on his head and his demeanor far more gentle than before. He crouched beside the bench so he was level with Lily and spoke to her directly, asking in a soft voice if she felt okay, if anything still hurt, and whether she wanted to talk to someone about what had happened. Mia answered most of the questions on her sister's behalf, gently nudging Lily to speak when she could, but Officer Rayburn didn't rush or pressure her. He explained that a full report had been filed, that the video would be attached, and that Karen had been issued a citation for assault and banned from the park indefinitely. If Lily's parents wanted to pursue charges, he said, they had every right to do so, and the police department would support them in that process. Mia thanked him sincerely, and he gave her a card with his direct number, telling her not to hesitate if they had questions or needed anything. After he left, Mia sat back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The reality of what they had just gone through was still settling in her bones, but the knowledge that Karen wouldn't be returning, at least not legally, offered some small relief. Still, she worried about what would come next. About the questions Lily would ask later that night. About the looks they might get when they returned to the park next weekend. About the way the world, as unfair and arbitrary as it was, seemed to punish those who simply existed a little differently. Later that afternoon, after the crowd had thinned and the sun began its slow descent behind the trees, the girls stood together near the playground once more. Lily looked at the slide, her face unreadable, then back at her sister. "Can I still go on it?" she asked, her voice quiet but sure. Mia felt a lump rise in her throat and nodded, smiling despite the sting behind her eyes. "Of course you can," she said. "You always could." And with that, Lily stepped forward. Her pace was still slow, deliberate, each foot placed carefully as she approached the steps. This time, the children made room for her without being told. One little girl even said, "You can go ahead," with a kind smile. And Lily, heartened by that small gesture of understanding, began to climb. Mia watched as her sister reached the top and sat down, bracing herself before launching off. It wasn't a long slide, but the look on Lily's face as she came down, eyes wide, hair fluttering, mouth open in a gleeful exhale, was a reminder that courage didn't always look loud or defiant. Sometimes, it looked like showing up again. Like climbing the same stairs where someone tried to knock you down. Like choosing not to be afraid. The week that followed the incident at the park unfolded slowly, as though the world was trying to return to normal while still acknowledging that something had changed. In the household where Lily and Mia lived with their mother, conversations were quieter, glances were longer, and the normal cadence of everyday life had subtly shifted, as though the air itself was heavier. Their mother, who had arrived at the park shortly after everything had transpired and had been briefed by both Mia and the ranger, was livid but composed in a way only mothers who had learned to swallow injustice for the sake of their children could be. She filed a formal police report the next morning, submitted the video as evidence, and contacted a local disability advocacy group for guidance, determined not to let the matter disappear into the bureaucratic void. But within the home, the focus was entirely on Lily, on her healing, her understanding, and the lingering emotional aftermath that no report or courtroom could ever fully resolve. Lily herself seemed quieter, but not in the way that signaled fear or withdrawal. Instead, she carried herself with a kind of watchful caution, as though still measuring the world in the wake of what had happened. She asked her mother questions with disarming directness. Why would someone think her braces made her less worthy of kindness? Why did that woman get so angry when all she did was walk slowly? Why didn't anyone stop her sooner? Each time, her mother answered with honesty wrapped in softness, telling her that sometimes people let their impatience and ignorance grow into cruelty, and it had nothing to do with Lily or how she moved. Mia, for her part, stayed close. She had always been the kind of older sister who oscillated between teasing and overprotectiveness, but now, the latter had taken root firmly, and she remained at Lily's side more than usual, walking her to class, sitting beside her during after-school snacks, and watching her with the kind of vigilant love that never needed to be spoken aloud. The video that had captured the moment, Karen's slap, the outrage, the voices rising in Lily's defense, spread online faster than anyone in the family had expected. A parent from the park had posted it anonymously to a parenting forum, and from there it made its way to local news pages and advocacy platforms. Within days, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times, drawing comments from strangers all over the country expressing sympathy, support, and fury. Some called for Karen's arrest, others shared their own stories of ableism and playground cruelty, and still more praised Lily's bravery. Mia had been hesitant about the video going public at first, worried that it would bring more stress or make Lily feel exposed, but when they watched it together and Lily said softly, "At least now people know how it feels," Mia knew it had been the right call. As the media attention grew, so did the pressure on the local authorities. Karen's identity was uncovered quickly. Her face, clearly visible once the sunglasses were removed, had been captured in enough detail to leave no doubt. She was contacted by reporters but refused to comment. When police confirmed that charges for misdemeanor battery and disorderly conduct had been filed, it brought a collective sense of validation to everyone who had witnessed the event. But none of that mattered as much to Lily as what happened the following Saturday when they returned to the park. Her mother had asked her several times if she was sure she wanted to go. Mia had, too, gently pointing out they could choose a different park or take a break for a while. But Lily, in her quiet but firm way, had simply said, "I want to go back. It's my park too." That single sentence held more power than 1,000 online comments or news segments. So they went, not with bravado or fanfare, but with the same simple intention that had brought them there before, to play, to laugh, to exist freely in a space that belonged to everyone. The park was busy again, just like the week before, with children darting between play structures and parents chatting in lazy circles around picnic blankets. But this time, something was different. When Lily stepped onto the playground path, flanked by Mia and their mother, a few parents stopped what they were doing to wave. A couple of children pointed and smiled. One boy, a little older than Lily and wearing a bright blue cape made of a beach towel, ran up and handed her a small drawing he'd made of a girl flying off a slide, braces and all. She took it with a small, grateful smile and tucked it into her pocket. It was subtle, but the mood around her had shifted. The community had seen her, truly seen her, and now they moved with a kind of care and awareness that hadn't existed before. Lily made her way to the slide again. There were a few kids ahead of her, and she waited as she always did, without complaint, her fingers gently tapping against the rubber grip of the railing. When it was her turn, she climbed slowly but surely, her steps steady and her chin lifted. At the top, she paused, looking out across the playground, her hair stirred gently by the wind. Then she pushed off, sailing down the slide with a quiet whoosh, her laughter light and real and free of fear. When she reached the bottom, Mia was there waiting, hands open, ready to catch her if needed, but Lily landed smoothly and stood tall, beaming. As the afternoon wore on, the park filled not just with activity but with a kind of quiet triumph, the kind that didn't need speeches or declarations to make itself known. It was in the way people looked at Lily now, not with pity, but with admiration. It was in the space they gave her, not out of condescension, but respect. And it was in the way Lily walked across the playground as though she belonged there, as though no one could ever again make her feel otherwise. The day ended with the sun dipping low, casting long golden beams across the playground as children were rounded up by their parents and goodbyes echoed through the air. Mia and Lily packed up slowly, their mother folding up a blanket with one hand and brushing sand off her jeans with the other. As they turned to leave, Lily glanced back once at the slide, then smiled softly, as if closing a chapter not with sadness, but with strength. She had returned not just to play, but to reclaim something no one had the right to take, her place, her joy, her dignity. And this time, no one stood in her way. The days that followed their return to the park began to feel softer, as though the world had exhaled some of its tension and allowed the family to settle back into the routine they had known before everything had changed. Yet despite the restored calm on the surface, something beneath had undeniably shifted, not just for Lily and Mia, but for the entire community. Conversations among the parents at the park, once focused on mundane matters like lunch schedules and school fundraisers, now carried a different weight. People spoke more carefully when children with disabilities passed by, not with patronizing tones but with a sense of recognition, as though finally aware of something that had always been there but never truly seen. A quiet ripple of understanding had passed through the space, not sparked by lectures or campaigns, but by a single moment, a slap, yes, but more importantly, the way the community had chosen to respond to it afterward. Lily seemed lighter in the days after her return to the park, not because the memory of what had happened had disappeared, but because she had re-entered that space on her own terms and found it still standing, not scarred but softened by solidarity. Her confidence began to return, not in loud declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the way she lingered longer at recess, the way she asked to go outside more often, and the way her smile came easier when someone asked how her day had gone. The trauma had not vanished. Children rarely forget being hurt, especially when the hurt comes not just from hands but from eyes that see them as less. But Lily had transformed that moment, turning it into something that didn't own her. It had become part of her story, yes, but not the whole of it. Mia, though still fiercely protective, began to breathe easier too. She had carried the weight of that day more heavily than she had admitted, not just the guilt of not getting to Lily in time, but the fury of watching someone reduce her sister's worth to nothing more than an inconvenience. She had spent hours scrolling through the comments under the video, grateful for the overwhelming support but also burdened by the few hateful ones that slipped through, each one a cold reminder that Karen was not an anomaly, only the loudest of many. But she had also read stories, hundreds of them, shared by strangers who thanked Lily for her bravery, who saw in her the courage to stand up again after being knocked down. And something about that, the realization that Lily had unknowingly given others strength, made the anger easier to carry. Their mother, too, changed in subtle ways. She joined an online support group for parents of children with disabilities, something she had avoided for years out of pride or perhaps fatigue, but now felt drawn to. She spoke openly, shared Lily's story not for sympathy but for impact, and found herself comforted by the network of parents who knew exactly how it felt to send a child into a world not built for them. She had long since learned to fight quietly, through paperwork, school meetings, and whispered reassurances at bedtime, but now she fought more visibly. She wrote letters to the city council, to the parks department, and eventually attended a public forum where she calmly, clearly, and unapologetically explained why what happened to her daughter mattered, and how easily it could happen again. Karen, for her part, faded from the spotlight. The charges she faced were minor in legal weight but significant in consequence. A guilty plea to a lesser charge, a fine, mandatory anger management courses, and a public apology issued through a lawyer that many doubted she wrote herself. She did not return to the park, nor was she seen at the local school functions or neighborhood events where once she had maintained a visible presence. Whether she felt remorse or merely shame was unclear, but in the end, it didn't matter. The community had made its choice, not just in ostracizing her, but in choosing to center and support the child she had harmed. Months passed, and seasons turned. The weather shifted from spring softness to the warmth of summer, and eventually to the rustling winds of early autumn. By then, Lily had grown taller, her braces upgraded to a new pair that shimmered faintly with hints of lavender and silver. She walked with the same careful deliberation, but there was something steadier in her steps, a quiet pride in her posture that hadn't been there before. At school, she gave a presentation about accessibility in playgrounds, her voice shaking at first but strengthening as she spoke. When she finished, her classmates clapped, not out of obligation, but with real enthusiasm, many of them seeing her not just as the girl with braces, but as someone who had something to say. One Saturday morning in late October, Mia and Lily returned to the park once again. The leaves had begun to fall in golden sheets, crunching softly beneath their feet as they approached the now familiar pathway. There was a new bench by the slide, freshly installed, with a small metal plaque affixed to the backrest. It read, "In celebration of inclusion, courage, and community. Dedicated to those who remind us all that every child deserves to play." The city had installed it quietly after pressure from local residents and a petition organized by Mia and several other teens who had rallied behind the cause. When Lily saw it, she simply sat down, ran her fingers across the engraved words, and smiled. As the wind picked up and the sun filtered through the turning leaves, the park felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely whole. Children ran by, their games unfolding without pause, and no one pointed or stared as Lily stood and made her way toward the slide. She waited in line, exchanged a few words with a boy she'd once been too shy to talk to, and when her turn came, she climbed, sat, and flew down just as she always had. But now, it was different, not because the slide had changed, but because she had. And when she reached the bottom, Mia was there again, not hovering, not worrying, just watching, with pride, with peace, and with the quiet knowledge that Lily had not only claimed her place in the world, but helped reshape it for others like her.